Number one, checkpoint is, in my definition, it's a place along the road when you're traveling, especially at the border of two places, where travelers are stopped for inspection. And you are asked, who are you? Why are you visiting us? Who are you going to visit in this place? So it's where visitors may have to present their ID. And I would like to say that if you're approaching Mindanao, you need to present your identification card. Who are you when you want to study Mindanao? And it's good to check that. And what is your relationship with the local? Can you clarify your objectives? While I'm speaking, I'd like to invite you to reflect on that. What is my experience and my relationship with Mindanao? Do I have parents who come from Mindanao? Do I know somebody, a classmate who come from Mindanao? Do I have a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever? Do I like tinala? Do I like tuna, etc.? So find a way to connect yourself with Mindanao. But there will be choke points, a place of greatest congestion, and often a hazard, a bottleneck, where there are obstacles to the journey, that which renders some challenges in the search for solutions to the problem. So if you examine Mindanao, then you realize there are choke points, there are difficult areas, there are danger signs, and we'd like to introduce them to the group. So in my discussion, I'd like to answer that. I have to present myself, a personal location. And then let's come in to understand Mindanao and then identify some choke points. So if I ask that question, how are you connected with Mindanao? Well, a personal note. I like batik, but I was born in Mindanao. But when I was 9 months old, we moved to Bulacan. And then later on, during martial law, I joined the Jesuits. And then later on, I was assigned to Mindanao for many years. Bulacan is like this, but I saw martial law since high school. And then later on, I was assigned to Mindanao, where I wrote a collection of poems on killings. Joined the Jesuits after my experiment with biochemistry in UST. I discovered the Jesuits. They write books, they fight for justice, they work with the poor. And later on, I realized the main enemy is Lasa. Twice, I was assigned to Davao, the place of Mayor Duterte, when I was a seminarian, and then later on, when I finished my doctorate from London. I put up an NGO in Ateneo de Davao for indigenous peoples. And from there, I worked with the Lumads, the Manobo, the Tibolis, and sometimes flying in a helicopter with machine guns. And why? Because, well, I don't want to picture Mindanao as all conflict, but there are conflict areas, and this is where I was coming from. So important to walk with the people in the rural areas and attend peace seminars and rituals where they don't offer flowers but guns. Okay, now rituals of killing pigs. And in this case, I was invited to be a witness to the reconciliation of two warring tribes. Now I accompanied some of the leaders of the tribal groups to Congress in their lobbying for autonomy within autonomy. There is the lobbying of autonomy for the Muslims, but there is also lobbying of autonomy of the indigenous groups, even inside the Muslim areas. While staying in Mindanao, Ateneo de Davao, teaching in development studies and anthropology, I was asked by the bishops, Ulama conference, to conduct 311 focus group discussions to get the pulse.
Do I need to be part of that? Do I need to do it?
and then Dialogue Mindanao with the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. When I transferred to Zamboanga Siege, I became a member of the crisis management team of the city, to in relation to the Zamboanga siege. The MNLF attacked Zamboanga, and you can see the buildings there, the cathedral, and next to the cathedral is Ateneo de Zamboanga, and just behind them is the fighting. Actually, in the house of the Jesuits, we got three live bullets. So 10,000 houses got burned. I was there and talking to the Muslim leaders, even to the commander of the MNLF. As a result, I made friends with the religious leaders of the Muslims, and this is where I'm coming from now. Yeah, that's Mayor Beng in the center, and so I was engaged in dialogue, and sometimes you don't use words but symbols, like an embrace, a hug in front of the refugees. While I'm talking here, I might sound exotic, but you'll never know. One of you might be in this position later on in a different way. I got the bonus of a free massage from the Taos of Boys. Okay. Now, later, I was also recruited with the government to have dialogue with the communists. And I was even in, sorry about that. Sorry, I cannot enlarge it. Okay. Now, so we went to Oslo to talk to these leaders of the Communist Party of the Philippines. And I brought some tribal groups to Subic. And then I introduced this interfaith dialogue. When I was in Zamboanga, I also engaged in a fight against human trafficking. And I was asked to mediate between the Muslims and the Christian college, Pilar College. And along the way, then more than 15 years in Mindanao, I published and wrote books and edited journals. For example, this annotated bibliography of Mindanao studies, generating energies in Mount Apo. And in the planning for peace and development framework for Mindanao Development Authority, I worked with Shell Habitat. But along the way, I also wrote poems. And you can see in one of my collection of poems, it's called Sanayan Lang Ang Pagpatay. Killing is just a matter of getting used to. It's a matter of practice. And actually, I'm saying, don't get used to killings. Don't get used to routinization and trivialization of violence. AHEM, it's anti-corruption movement, and monitoring the Bureau of Customs, including the Bureau of Customs in Davao, where we arrested the corruption in the Bureau of Customs, where there is an X-ray machine, 250 million pesos worth, and it's now, until now, it's closed. When I came back to Manila, I got involved in the series of witnesses of Davao death squads, and because of that, I got some death threats. Take note, it's not all politics. I founded this, I co-founded with the leaders of this Amuma Cancer Support Group Foundation, and mostly women with cervical cancer, breast cancer. Of course, there are light moments. Finally, there's a need to explain Mindanao, and my most recent project is this Mindanao history timeline infographics, kind of a 4 meter long, maybe 4 meters long of tarpaulin visualizing history and culture, economy, and even ecological history of Mindanao. If you check the YouTube, you will also see my lullaby for peace in Mindanao. That's how I am involved in Mindanao. Now, then you can say, well, you are very close to Mindanao, but we are not. Well, let's see. For all you know, we are all connected to Mindanao. You cannot say, if there is war in Mindanao, then they declare no flights, then we have a problem, and it affects the whole country. And for all you know, Mindanao, this is Mindanao profile. We realize that it's very much part of the Philippines, with 26 provinces, 27 cities, 425 municipalities, 10,000 barangays. And take note, where do you get your tuna? Where do you get your pineapple, your saging, etc.? So Mindanao contributes more than 30% of the national food requirements. So it's getting low. We cannot say in Manila, we cannot say we're not connected, because 30% of what we eat in the Philippines comes from Mindanao. Is that so? Yes. And not only that, you have sardines, rubber, seaweeds, ceramics, shellcraft, pineapple, high-value crops, vegetables, tourism. Mindanao is very much part of our country, our history. You have bananas, processed foods, rubber, palm oil, and recently also technology, okay, coffee. Now, of course, the important thing is familiarity with the people. About almost 9% of the people there would belong to some 33 different kinds of tribal ethnic groups, and 13 Islamized tribes. What do you know? Tausug, Maguindanao, Calagan, Colambugan, Bajau, etc. But numerically, Christians form the majority in Mindanao. It's good to think about that. Now, let's have a short quiz. 1/4 sheet of paper. Now, let's have a short quiz about this sentiment. Ano yung pambansang dawan, anahaw, pambansang bulaklak, sampagita, pambansang prutas, mangga, pambansang puno, nara, pambansang bahay, hindi ngayon kondo na, no? Bahay kubo, not bahay kondo, pambansang ibon, agila, not maya, and pambansang hayop, kalabaw, pambansang isda, bangus, and pambansang pagkain. Now, let's pause for a while here. Don't get angry at me. I got this from a poster which I bought in national bookstores. No? Now, if you were Muslim and we're talking about nation building through symbols, how would you feel? But in the daintiness of a classroom, probably the teachers, many teachers, are not aware that sometimes we think we are not connected, but actually we are connected sometimes negatively. How would a Muslim friend feel about this? Sabi, binubuo ninyo yung bansa niyo, hindi naman pala kami kasali dyan. Pero pag hiwalay kami, ayaw niyo naman. Why? Ang dami-dami naman pagkain sa Pilipinas. Ba't kailangan i-deklara na national food ang baboy? Sino ba nag-deklara niyan? Nasa poster lang naman yan. That's why I'm calling your attention to representation. That's why I started with How are you related to Mindanao? How do you imagine Mindanao? Because sometimes Mindanao, you have not been there, but you're already afraid. You have not been there, you don't know anyone from there, and you already have some, I could already have some bias. And it's because of, representation, the images we create and we present to represent Mindanao. There are so many Muslims who are very capable of being announcers and commentators. Pero nakakita ka ba ng weather forecaster ng babae na naka-hijab, nakabelo ng Muslim? Hindi. Ba't ganon? Hindi pwede, walang qualified. Hindi naman totoo yun, di ba? Pero para bang winawala sila. Kung minsan mali pa. Okay, Pambansang Bayani. Rizal. Tama, Pambansang Kamao. O, tingnan to, may nakita akong ganito. Ba't nagkaganito? Sorry, minamadali ko to kasi na-delay tayo ng 30 minutes, no? Sabi nga, paano nangyari yan? Well, I'd like to call your attention to how we imagine and how some people try to make us imagine about Mindanao. We're doing sociology and social analysis, but sometimes our analysis is based on misrepresentation. Now, talking about misrepresentation, we had a study when I was in Zamboanga. We had a study of the textbooks being used in basic education. And in one textbook, I saw this, pangkat ng mga Muslim. Sumusunod ay naniniwala sa Islam. Maguindanao, nasa Davao del Sur daw. Tausug, nasa Lanao del Norte daw. And the teachers, when I presented this to the teachers, sabi niya, Father, what's wrong? What's wrong? Maguindanao are not in Davao del Sur. They are in Cotabato. The Tausug are not in Lanao. They are in Sulu. The Maranao, look at that. Maranao, sabi nasa Sulu. Mali, baliktad. And yet so many teachers, professors, authors of books are not aware that this page could be very wrong. Meron isa dito tama, yung Yakan is in Basilan. Pero ano naman yung description nila? Yakan daw, ang Yakan naman ay taga Basilan, tama naman yun. Pero maliliit lang sila. Ano? Maliliit lang. Yung bang minamaliit? Ano yung maliit? At totoo bang maliit? At ano ngayon kung maliliit? Singkit ang mga mata at maitim ang buhok na taga Borneo. Ha? Bakit? Ako din, itim din ang buhok ko ha. Di ako nagtitina. Anong klaseng textbook yan? Tapos ito pa, grade 2, mga bata sa Mindanao. Paguluhan sa Mindanao ay may malaking epekto sa pamumuhay ng kabataan doon. Tinatayang halos kalahating milyon apektado maglipat-lipat ng pamilya dahil sa madalas na pagsiklab ng labanan sa pagitan ng mga sundalo at rebelde. Tignan mo naman yan, drawing ba yan pang textbook? Tapos at the lower portion of the page, sinasabing maraming batang lalaki ang nakukumbinsi ng mga teroristang Muslim na sumanib sa kanila. Grade 2, you're infusing this terminology of teroristang Muslim. Buti kung representation lang yan. You know, this representation, again, I call upon your sensitivity to representation. When you say, I read a book, well, you read a book. That's not necessarily the reality. No? Well, I know the statistics. Yes, you know the statistics, but that's not exactly the reality. We need to double check by many other, these are just indications, but not necessarily the reality. And these representations have effect on policies. For example, I got this economic density map of the Philippines, and look, the dark portions are a measure of economic activity per square kilometer. And look at the concentration of the development activities. They're all concentrated in Metro Manila and very, relatively neglected in Mindanao and Visayas and many, many other parts of the country. And some of you might work later on with multinational companies, with government, with NGOs. Don't underestimate the power of representation, of images, of maps, because sometimes we say, okay, let's have a highway there, without thinking of whether there are tribes or communities that will be affected by this highway, no? Ngayon, kung idadagdag mo pa yung religion, iba-iba, no? So when you say majority would be Christians, we need to problematize that. We need to problematize that. I'd like to call your attention to this policy data. When the Americans took over the Spaniards, they introduced a different kind of land tenure system. In 1903, they said land should not be just for anybody. There should be some kind of a formality and formalization of ownership. So they said, okay, lands should be titled. Who can title lands? Homesteader, meaning Christians, 16 hectares are allowed. Non-Christians, there was no provision. But corporations, local and foreign, mostly foreign, they were allowed to occupy 1,024 hectares. In 1919, 24 hectares for the Christians and 10 hectares only for the Muslims and the Lumans. Again, maintaining 1,000 hectares for the corporations. 1936, 4 hectares only for the non-Christians and 16 hectares. So you can imagine, this shows the deliberate, systematic, legalized land grabbing. And some of these very rich people in the country now, they owe a lot to this systematic land grabbing of the territories of the Mindanao people. So take note, in 1918 census, only 20 towns were 50% occupied by the Muslims, and the Christians, nothing. In 1939, the settlers already got inserted, and 1970, and take note, bayan ng settlers, the Christians, are now the dominant population. Graphically, something like this, no? In 1918, the green big territory belonged to the Muslims and the rest, the Lumans. But by 1939, the Christian settlers got inserted. But then in 1970, the yellow ones, the Christian settlers became the dominant population. That's why when you look at statistics, don't just take them on their face value. Na anyway, majority naman ng Christians, so let the Christians rule. Why? We have to problematize that. We need to challenge the habit of thinking majority rules, minority follows. Sa mga eskwelahan, di ba? O mag-outing tayo. O sige, divide the house. Divide the house. Majority rules. That's not always an ideal way of settling an exchange of opinions. Now, when you look at this Christian majority, number one, the majority now has not been the majority in the beginning, as we have seen, no? Oh, tapos, Christians from the majority in the Philippines form the majority in the Philippines, but if we expand our map to include Asia, for example, then the Christians in Asia are a minority. And third, while Christians feel we are the majority in the country, actually in some places like Brazil, Christians are a minority. So we need to problematize this, no? So, tanong natin, ano, is it possible that in opening many schools in Mindanao, we have not just shared faith and civilization, but have also extended the colonial project? So you ask, how can schools be helpful in promoting peace? We must first clarify this sociology of Mindanao, sociology of institutions that are in Mindanao, and whether, for example, institutions like or schools like Ateneo are bearers of good news or promoters of biases. When you say, we are great, we are the champion, ganyan. Palaging utak panalo, ganyan. Utak dominant forces. Pagka ganyan, medyo malabo tayo. Okay? Now, so maybe this could be a very, very quick platform lang. So, kaya pala merong mga away. No? In a few years ago, I was asked to lead this public consultations on the peace process in Mindanao, and I headed this, this team, and our project was to conduct extensive community consultation and dialogue in the service of GRPM-ILF peace talks. Now, so what was our main learning? Well, governments and rebel groups sign peace agreements. Ultimately, it's the people who have the burden of rebuilding schools, houses, retrusting institutions, welcoming ex-combatants, looking for a new breed of leaders, nursing the environment, bridging gaps across mindsets, and healing painful memories, and even spiritually appeasing the spirits of the land. Okay. Anyway, ito yung project structure namin. I will not burden you with this, but we ask 4 questions. What is your vision of peace in Mindanao? And on the peace negotiation, what are your recommendations? And then on the broader peace process, what other steps, what other sources of conflict do you know? What can you recommend? And then personal commitment, what can you do? So we conducted 311 focus group discussions using 10 languages. Bisaya, Ilocano, Cebuano, Ilocano, Tausug, Mindanao, Maranao, etc. And then I'd like to summarize our findings into 6 S's. Number 1, in almost all of the 311 focus group discussions in different languages, different sectors, different regions of Mindanao, including Negros, there's a feeling of mistrust. But it doesn't mean they are cynical. It just means they're looking for people whom they can trust. Sincerity. Hindi yung, sometimes they can distrust funding agencies, even NGOs, and even priests, and even rebels, government. They also have fears na delikado. So they're looking for security, not just checkpoints, military checkpoints. We discovered also layers and layers of hurts. The Muslims got hurt with the Christians got hurt because of the Muslims, and the indigenous groups got hurt by both the actions of the Christians and the Muslims. And people get hurt when they lose their land, when somebody is killed in the family. And so when people discriminate against the different religions, when people don't talk about them, when they don't appear in the textbooks, you cannot. When their literature is not read in literature classes, yung ganun ba? Ang daming hurts. But they also want to participate. So feeling of the desire to participate, that calls for solidarity. So we need to channel this desire for solidarity. And you know, in 311 focus group discussions, without telling them so, they normally started with the prayer. And for them, the issue in Mindanao should not be solved only by political scientists or economists or engineers or environmentalists, but also with the participation of the religious leaders, the faith in God. And then whatever changes should be made sustainable, not just in terms of ecology, but in maintaining institutions. Okay, now I'll just go through this very quickly in order to jump security, in order to jump to some what I call residual issues. Huh? Okay. Now, what would be some other issues aside from what I have mentioned? Okay. Now, sorry about this. Okay. It's some residual issues. Number one, we may need to look at both the conflict between the government and the communists, between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and even the MNLF. In other words, there are so many other conflicts. Government forces versus MILF, government forces versus the MNLF, government versus the communists, government versus the Abusayaf, corporate entities like logging versus the indigenous communities, government versus criminal elements, criminals, and then clan versus clan, RIDO. Grabe, daming issues. Okay, now, as you can see, we need to examine the interrelationship between the CPP-NPA and the MILF. So maybe you can ask questions later on. Secondly, we may need to have a special focus on the indigenous peoples in the peace process. Until now, you know, earlier this morning, I had a session with indigenous leaders, and they have a problem because now that there is Bangsamoro autonomy, they are asking, what about us? What about the Lumads, indigenous peoples within the Muslim territories? They are left out. They are left out. Even in the discussion with the communists, when I was in Oslo, the indigenous peoples are left behind in the framework of the National Democratic Front. Now, so I'd like to call attention to that, not to the indigenous peoples. And then peace communication. We mentioned some conflicts are caused by misrepresentation. Some of you might be going into communication, and please take note that some of this communication, the way we report, pag merong Muslim na kidnappers, sinasabi, oh, the police caught Muslim kidnappers. Pero when they catch Catholic kidnappers, they don't say Catholic kidnappers. Di ba, no? Okay, now, so siguro, I'll end with this. The last thing we want is to have an excellent draft of a peace agreement only to be rejected by the people simply because we failed to communicate with them. Now, we don't have time, so I'll try to end here. Now, who are you when you study Mindanao? You don't just be a social scientist, objective. clarify for yourself what is Mindanao to you, what is at stake. And if you think of the whole country, Mindanao should be part of the planning and imagination and love and affection of those who love our country. So please connect your thesis papers, connect your reflection papers in literature, in mathematics, in economics, in sociology to Mindanao. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Alejo, for an insightful and comprehensive conversation piece this morning and afternoon. No? So at this juncture, we would like to extend the virtual floor, so to speak, to our participants. And we would like to invite you to ask questions and to post them on our chat box. But to start the ball rolling, so to speak, Paring Bert, a question that has been asked for a long time is, given the immensity of issues that have been grappled with, or we are continuing to struggle with or grapple with when it comes to Mindanao. And in the context of your presentation this morning or afternoon, which would you recommend or which would you suggest that we focus our energies and time or devote our attention to, as far as genuinely and radically, shall we say, finding solutions to what besets Mindanao currently? Ano po sa tingin ninyo yung unang hakbang na kailangan gawin?
Para sa akin, find a way to connect to Mindanao reality. Find a friend. Ganon, Kasi pag wala yun, academic lang yan eh. Ang dami na yan. Daming statistics sa internet. Find a way to be personally involved with Mindanao. If you like tuna, you can start with tuna. Then make a study of tuna. When you when you break a piece of tuna, can you imagine where it comes from? Can you be emotionally connected to the fisher folks there in General Santos? When you like seaweeds, when you like waterfalls, ganon. So try to find a way. Yung iba mahilig sa design, sa fashion. Can you do a research on the possibilities of making fashion designs using the native materials? Yung bag. And then, connect, anong tribo ang gumagawa ng mga tinala? Saan tribo galing yan? Try to connect. Oo. Ngayon, meron mga Muslim dito sa Green Hills. So, try to talk to them. Saan galing mo ito mga perlas? Kahit hindi kayo bibili. So, get interested and personally connected. Text some friends. Oo. So, yun ang umpisa. Then, the rest will follow, I think.
Thank you very much, Paring Bert. In relation to that, there was a question that was posted by a student from my class, if you may, Father. It has something to do with the residual issues that you just presented. And he is curious about how certain residual issues, and you may point to one or two here, have negatively shaped, and shall we say, negatively transformed in a way, Philippine society as a whole. Can you give probably one or two examples of that?
As I said, ako as a student, I'd like to really call your attention to communication, to how another person, another group is represented by somebody else. Have you experienced that? Now you have a friend and then his friend comes in and you get introduced and he says, oh, ito yung kaibigan ko. Mayaman yan. Yung daddy niya, may-ari na. Huwag mo sabihin yan. Iniiba mo, I feel awkward. Why do you have to say that? Diba? Ito, girlfriend to nung dati kong best friend. Ganyan. But do you have to say that? Who are you to represent me that way? And so I'd like to call your attention to this. When you read a novel, when you read a poem, when you listen to music, don't don't just take things as they are. So use your creativity and critical faculties to check and double check. So when you read statistics, sabihin mo, sino gumawa ng statistics? Kung credible, then you take hold of that. Tapos you ask about gaps. So you should be alert in misrepresentation, but we should also be alert to underrepresentation. When there is a survey, ilan dyan yung sa survey ang galing sa Mindanao? Di ba ganun, ano? Let's look at your readings in sociology. Is there any reading there that somehow touches on Mindanao? Pagka sa literature, tingnan nga natin, ito yung mga classics. Meron ba diyang epic tungkol sa Mindanao? Wala pa rin. Ano pa naman yan? Di ba? So be careful, be alert in how Mindanao is represented, misrepresented, underrepresented, or totally erased or deleted. If there is cancel culture in Facebook, if there is bashing in the social media, Mindanao has been a victim of so much bashing and cancel culture. So let's not contribute to that kind of crime.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Ice, for that question. No, very poignant indeed. There is another question, Paring Bert, from Margot Prado, and she actually asks how ordinary Filipino citizens, no, can proactively combat, I'm reading from the chat box, the negative biases against minorities, such as our Muslim and indigenous communities. So I think this connects to the first two answers a while ago, Paringbert.
This is where I'd like to introduce the word reflexivity. Looking at myself, my experience. When was it that I experienced being discriminated against? For example, in the family. Why are you not like your brother, a scholar? You, ba't hindi ka magaling? Kasing galing ng ano. Yung ganun ba? No? Try to reflect. I'm sure at some point you were a victim of unfair or unnecessary derogation, discrimination. When you were unfairly compared to somebody who is better in music or in sports. And then try to relive that pain and project that so that you could somehow guess or get a sympathetic emotion to what other minorities might be feeling. Now, in some cases, you have to go abroad and feel that you are a minority. Sabihin mo, don't treat me like black. I'm brown. Sorry, brown is black. Akala mo maputi ka na, pero dahil hindi ka talaga puti, ituturing kang black. So kung minsan, it takes some kind of a painful experience of being discriminated against, being unfairly compared, and then you realize, my God, hindi pala tama yon. Masakit pala yon. And I don't want to inflict that kind of pain unfairly on other groups. And then more positively, get interested. You know, when we conducted this Consult Mindanao, I asked the fourth question, what can you do? Sabi ng isang magsasaka, Muslim, sabi niya, I promise to pray 10 minutes a day for Mindanao peace. Wow! Yung isa naman sabi, I didn't realize this, no? Pero now I'm ready to tell my children, yes, you can play with the Muslims. You can play with them. Okay? Yung isa naman sabi, I've been in Mindanao for many years. I never really made an attempt to learn another language of Mindanao. So I'd like to read one novel about Mindanao. I'd like to read a few verses of poetry in another language. I'd like to, so do something to go beyond your narrow-mindedness. Ako, for me, it's still a process. And my being subjected to discrimination in other parts of the world became instructive to me. When I was in London, when I was in the US. Lowback na pala yung ano ko.
Okay, maraming salamat, paring Bert. We have several questions here, and we'll probably wrap up with these 3 questions, no? If that's okay with you, paring Bert, no?
Just half a minute. I'll get
Sige
my
lang po.
card.
Sige lang po.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, paring Bert. Yung sunod pong tanong ay mula kay Mr. Paolo Paculan. Kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, guro po siya sa Ateneo High School, no? Babasahin ko po yung kanyang isinulat sa chat box. Salamat po, Father. Sinusubok ko pong magsaliksik tungkol sa at kilalanin ang Mindanao. Pero pakiramdam ko po, napakahirap maabot ng wastong kaalaman tungkol sa Mindanao, lalo na ngayong nakakulong tayo sa bahay at kailangang sa internet magsaliksik. Saan po kaya maaaring magsimula sa paghahanap? Sinong mga grupo po ang maaari kong konektahan para mas makilala ang Mindanao? Halimbawa, kahit sa aspeto ng pagkain, ng panitikan. Okay? So I think connected po muli sa mga nabanggit nyo more or less, paring Bert, yung pong tanong na binigay ni Mr. Paculan.
Okay, thank you. Sa internet na lang, importante yun, ano? Importante yun sa internet na meron tayong, tignan niyo yung Minda News. Kasi pangkaraniwan, wala tayong masyadong balita sa Mindanao unless na nagkakagulo, no? So, sorry. Saan na yan? Meron nung tinatawag na Minda News na website. Ito yung mga mas reliable na news tungkol sa Mindanao. Tumatalon itong aking ano. Ito. Yung tawag ko dito ay Minda News. Ito. Minda News. Kung gusto natin ng mga authentic na mga balita tungkol sa Mindanao, go to the website of Minda News. This is a kind of an NGO news syndicate. I know very well the founders and the reporters. And once in a while, I write for them also. So this is a good source of news, what's happening, na fair. Hindi naman very always critical of the government or pro-government. It really wants to maintain its credibility of just reporting fairly what is happening to Mindanao. And if you notice, after home, tingnan mo ang kanilang mga subsections. Peace process, Minda views, no, opinions, business, environment, governance, sports, pictures, Marawi crisis, ganyan. So importante na meron tayong reliable source. At ito yung magandang reliable source. Not very academic, but solid, reliable reporting in general. In general. Okay? Now, you also have mga ganito, quick facts on Mindanao. Okay? Take note, yung Mindanao News, meron silang itong opinion section, mga commentaries. Sa internet yan. Baka siyempre may iba pa kayo sa YouTube. Maganda yung mga video. Okay. Magaling naman kayo mag-research eh. Pero at least meron kayong isang ano. Itong Mindanao News also collects the titles of the books every year. The books that are being published in about Mindanao. Now the other thing is, I have this project from Mindanao History Timeline, and the result is I expanded Mindanao history beyond just the political. So I included socio-cultural, economic history, and ecological. Even the history of disasters and deforestation. And the result is a timeline infographic. Yeah. Okay. Na ano to, 5 meters long, of 4, maybe 4 meters. There is also a book, this one. This book is the Peace and Development Framework Plan for Mindanao. I was part of the drafting committee here, and it's a very nice. If you go to the website of Mindanao Economic Development Authority, MINDA, you can download the whole book that summarizes and put in coherent form the aspirations and imperatives expressed and espoused by Mindanaoans of various ethno-cultural, sectoral, economic backgrounds. Ayan. So that would be a good book to read, a reference book. It's not just a book, it's a policy and plan framework for Mindanao. It's called Mindanao 2020.
All right. Thank you, Father, for your comprehensive answer, as well as for Mr. Pakulan for asking that question. Now, for our last two questions, Paring Bert, I will try to consolidate the comments of Miss Gwen Vasquez from Ateneo de Davao and Ami. This is something to do with, I will read the message or the comment so as to capture the essence of it. No? Recently, there have been strides to end the conflict in Muslim areas in Mindanao through the Bangsamoro Organic Law. But as you have mentioned, indigenous peoples seem to have been left out in the peace process. There are also allegations that when we try to connect, quote unquote, with our IP brothers and sisters, we do so by exoticizing and appropriating their culture, for example, by wearing their tribal attires in events and celebrations. What is your view on this matter? And before you answer that question, Father, let me read the second question, which connects to that. No, for retailers who incorporate tribal motifs or local textiles in their contemporary outfits, for example, kaayo.ph, when is fusion fashion considered appreciation, and when is it cultural appropriation?
Oh, we need another session for that. in the sense that the issue of the indigenous peoples really is very complicated because they are bombarded in all directions. They have to face the Christians, they have to face the Muslims, they have to face the mining companies, they have to face the new People's Army and the small traders. And when they try to adapt, they go to school, they realize that the curriculum has nothing to do with them. So it's really difficult. It's really a difficult situation, but it's not zero because the government has a Magna Carta for indigenous peoples. And for those who are really interested in the indigenous peoples' plight, let's talk about the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, because it is the Magna Carta and not too many countries have equivalent legislation. So at least the indigenous peoples in the Philippines can hold on to an important document, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or IPRA. Some of you who are in Ateneo, you please join the organization KIP, Coalition of Ateneans for Indigenous Peoples. And in other schools, probably you might have something like equivalent, Mountaineers Club, etc. So please initiate your own self-study and if possible, join a conversation, whether in face-to-face or via Zoom. It's very complicated, but right now, actually my project now is to put up a Center for Indigenous Leadership and Management. It's called AGILA, and it means Apo Governance and Indigenous Leadership Academy. We are harvesting the indigenous individuals who managed somehow to finish college, and now we want to help them become leaders, entrepreneurs, social advocates, and even sometimes political leaders. So some of you who are, have access to some funding agencies and generous donors, please help, please help. Our project now in the foot of Mount Apo is a nursery and a restaurant and the training center for indigenous social entrepreneurs, indigenous people's mandatory representatives in college, in the government. So there are so many things that can be done. While their problems are big, the titled lands that they have carved out from the national territory are also huge. They, hundreds of thousands of hectares of watersheds and tourist spots, waterfalls area, and beautiful area. So one of these days, please visit an area. I will not tell you what to do, but you determine it for yourself. Before you get crippled, before you go old, please don't just climb a mountain, interact with the tribe. Please, don't waste your time. While you still have the energy, don't just climb a mountain, interact with the people who know the story of the mountain. And then along the way, you will discover where you fit in and where your resources and competencies could be made useful to these people. Now, some of you are connected politically, engaged politically. So it's quite important to lobby with them and for them for their own rights. Minimum, study the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. Now, about fashion, yeah, I know. For example, the Tiboli, they have Sila Janita Eco, they have a women weavers group maintaining and preserving the traditional way of weaving. But there's also the business side. There is a factory of tinala and they produce more quickly semblance of tinala for more commercial sale. Is that bad? to some extent, it promotes the culture and even fashion, but we also have to protect the traditional ways of doing things. But take note, when you say traditional, it doesn't mean they don't change. For example, the group of Janita Equa in Tiboli, originally they only had two colors, red and black. But now, because of fashion needs, they have new colors, but from the pigments of trees and leaves as well. From the cacahuate, they derive pigments for gray. From the achuete, red. All kinds of, lively colors nowadays. And they have fashioned the abaca more finely, and now they have a softer tinala. So, but they maintain the labor intensive and dream based designs, but they also adjust to the needs of the times.
Okay, thank you very much, Paring Bert. At this juncture, we would like to thank our resource speaker, Father Albert Alejo, for generously sharing his time with us. He's a very busy individual, but he took time to actually provide a very comprehensive and insightful conversation piece for us to ponder and reflect on as we go along, no? Learning about Mindanao. So at this point as well, I would like to thank everyone for bearing with us despite the technical difficulties initially, no?
Sorry
And
about
for
that.
joining us, no, for joining us this morning and afternoon, no, and hopefully you can join us again in our future online conversations, and hopefully, Paring Bert, we can schedule another conversation in the
Sure.
future regarding cultural appropriation and cultural erasure. Pertaining to Mindanao as well, no? So again, this webinar conversation has been presented by the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Anthropological and Sociological Initiatives of the Ateneo, or DSA-ASIA. And we would like to invite you once again for our to our future online conversation. So please stay tuned, and we will keep you posted on those future undertakings. So again, Paring Bert, maraming salamat po sa pagpapaunlak sa ating mga taga-subaybay. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. At ingat po kayo palagi.
Okay, salamat po.
Salamat, Paring Bert. Salamat, Paring Bert.
Salamat po.